capping the year today, I'm really thrilled to welcome Andrew Katz, the Chief Marketing Officer of the Athletic Brewing Company, the brand revolutionizing non-alcoholic beer industry with innovative brews and a mission-driven approach. Andrew brings a wealth of experience from global giants like Heineken and PepsiCo, coupled with an entrepreneurial spirit that's helped Athletic Brewing become a category leader. Andrew, so great to see you today.
Great to be here, Matt.
Absolutely. So Athletic Brewing has really exploded in recent years. And for those in the audience that don't know about Athletic Brewing, would love to hear just a little bit of a background.
100%. So it was founded in 2017 by John Walker and Bill Schufelt. And they started just brewing in Gatorade jugs, 5 gallons at a time, until they got something that they were really proud of.
Brewing what?
Brewing non-alcoholic beer.
Gotcha.
So they Bill had a thesis that, he didn't really love the effects of alcohol, but he loved beer. And he just couldn't find anything on the market that was satisfying. And he's like, why has nobody solved this problem yet? And I think after a long conversation with his wife, she's like, you should solve it. And he's like, I don't know anything about brewing. So
he had never had any experience in that
whatsoever. No, he was, a Wall Street guy and definitely living a very high performance lifestyle,
right.
But, didn't have any brewing expertise. The classic entrepreneur story, he reached out to 100 different brewers. He got 99 no's, but then John Walker answered his call and said, yeah, that sounds interesting. And so John Walker, very award-winning brewer, and they got together and started putting together what is now Athletic Brewing, which is the #1 non-alcoholic beer brand in America.
Now, some of the big incumbents in the beer space have tried to launch and have launched non-alcoholic brews. Why do you believe that they were not as successful at coming out with a product that really kind of became a dominant brand? Because obviously there was if a need is filled for the consumer, it's much harder for a company like Athletic Brewing to come in there. It seems like what you're saying, there's an unmet need.
Yeah.
Why did that unmet need exist?
100%. So there are a couple. There's not one simple answer to it, so I'll give you a longer-winded one. The longer-winded answer is we had no baseline. We had no expectations about what athletics should taste like, right? So if you are Budweiser, or if you're Heineken, you have a reference, right? You have the reference is your base brand.
Right.
So it has to taste like your base brand. We had no reference.
Interesting.
Right? So we could create the best tasting version of
from scratch.
From scratch. So we make 50 different styles of beer, some of which is right here on the table. And then we've got 5 different flagships, from IPAs to hazies to lights. And so each and every version of that beer is the best possible tasting NA beer that we can make. So that's #1. #2, if you think about these legacy brands, 94 to 95% of what they sell has alcohol in it. So if you think about how small that volume is for them, they're really focused on their core. They have to.
Right, it's almost like an afterthought.
I think it's becoming less of an afterthought. Mick Ultra Zero just launched, and the ABI CEO was just on stage this past weekend talking about how much they're going to lean into it. It's where the market's going. The challenge is we are never selling against ourselves. At some level, they have to sell against themselves. And it's a tough space.
You're cannibalizing your core business.
In a lot of ways, right? You're not necessarily, it's not accretive to your business. It's probably just a substitute, right? So you're not, for us, we are accretive to the rest of the alcohol industry. 80% of our drinkers drink, and therefore, a lot of what we refer to our drinkers as their zebra striping, right? So they're going back and forth, or maybe they're having a couple of IPAs and then they're switching to an athletic IPA. They don't want to stop drinking, but they don't want more alcohol.
Right. So you crafted these new brews from scratch, that were endemic to the notion of non-alcoholic beer. Then you obviously had to do a lot of other things right as a company to bring it to market as successfully as you have. What were some of those other things after you actually came up with the formulas and the liquid to actually make it work?
Yeah, so I joined the company about 3.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And when I joined, I was just so impressed with everything that had been created very thoughtfully. Bill, at the very beginning stages of the business, would load up his car with beer and drive up and down the eastern seaboard, going to road races and sampling Athletic at the end of a road race. So he went to one of the most authentic communities there are, right? People who are already inclined to be thinking about their health and well-being, and gave them something that they really appreciated. They're very receptive in that moment to trying something new. And it was just a great fit. People who are living active lifestyles are generally thinking beyond just like physical health. They're thinking about other aspects of their health. This fits so well. And so like that was how this brand was born. It was really born by getting cans in hands. It's a very experiential brand. I could tell you, hey, you want to try some NA beer? And you're like, nah, right? But then once you get it in someone's hand and they try it for themselves, they're actually pretty blown away. They're like, oh my God, this tastes like beer. And it's like, that's the point.
And the packaging obviously is fantastic. And, for those listening, Andrew brought a bunch of different versions of Athletic Brewing product. And when you see the packaging, it looks different. It doesn't look like overdone kind of micro brewery packaging. It looks very tasteful, but still kind of sticks out. Tell me about what the ethos is and kind of thinking is behind the packaging, and why do you think it's been, part of the success?
So that's a great question. And unfortunately, a lot of craft beer was anti-marketing.
Yeah.
Right? And not for nothing, marketing actually works. Like any marketing professional can attest to the fact that when you have a great product, great packaging, right, and great content, chances are you're going to be successful. So a lot of craft beer was anti any of that. And you can see what's happened in the craft beer market, a lot of declines, and it's too bad. So we had a very different opinion on why wouldn't we want to market this great product. And so our packaging, so this is, some of the things I've learned in my career. You have the biggest number of touch points you have is your packaging, right? It seems pretty obvious. But you better make that packaging the best ad.
People judge a book by its cover, right?
People judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
And you better make that packaging as recognizable, as standout, as attractive as you possibly can, because maybe that's the only touch point a consumer will ever have with your product.
Right.
So it better be great. And so some of the things that we did was, when I joined, it was really about making Athletic the hero, and making that was always intended to be our bar call, was always intended to be our retail ask. Where's your Athletic? Do you have Athletic? So that this was first and foremost the thing that people would subscribe to. Then it was about a fanciful name, Wits Peak, right? So something clever, something fun. And then what kind of style of beer are we talking about? In this particular case, it's a Belgian style wheat. But then these landscapes that really were kind of, again, foundational to the company. We want to espouse a healthier, happier life for people. How do you do that? The best lives are not typically lived indoors. The best lives are typically out in the world. And so we just wanted to bring that to all of our packaging.
Very cool. So distribution to me is fascinating for non-alcoholic beer, because on one hand, the consumer expects to buy beer, non-alcoholic beer, I would assume, where beer is sold.
Yes.
Right? Which could be in liquor stores or in the aisles where other alcoholic products like beer are. But on the other hand, you are not bound by the constraints of having to sell where there's alcohol, because you don't have alcohol in your product. So theoretically, you could sell anywhere. So from an off-premise distribution standpoint, what is working in terms of where your product is actually offered and sold?
So it's an interesting paradox. The reality is we go to market just like beer. We're distributed by beer distributors. We're sold in the beer aisle.
Right.
So in many ways we mimic what the industry does, but you're right, we can show up in many other places. So it's a much more durable type of a product. And also, without alcohol, it removes any friction. Right. From like, man, I'd love a beer right now. Like right now, I'd love a beer. You know what? I'm going to have a beer right now.
Would you sell to 18-year-olds?
We don't. We typically,
Even though there's no alcohol in it?
even though, yeah, I mean, and it varies by state in terms of how it's regulated. But the reality is we tend to mimic, we're LDA compliant, so we behave the same way.
That's so interesting because ultimately there's no alcohol in it.
Correct. But it's still meant to be seen as an aspirational adult beverage.
Got it.
In spite of the fact that it doesn't have alcohol.
Got it. So that being said, I imagine you also have an on-premise business where you're selling in nightclubs and bars, etc. What does that strategy look like, and how's demand been on-premise where you're selling a product that doesn't have alcohol in it? Where basically people generally go to those venues to drink alcohol traditionally.
So like I said, it's not a binary thing. People are zebra striping. People are going back and forth. Some, they may have their, 7.5% IPA, and then they back off and they have an athletic.
Interesting.
So it's very much integrated into how people are kind of consuming alcohol these days. Also in Brooklyn, there's one of my favorite drink specials. It's called the Hypocrite, and it's a shot of tequila and an athletic.
Oh, wow.
And then, the other thing too is, we do see a high degree of correlation between states where marijuana is legal, THC is legal, CBD is legal, and incidents of non-alcoholic beer. And it makes sense. People don't want to get crossfaded.
So basically what you're saying is that where in states where cannabis is legalized, consumers might adopt that, but they're still out. And when they're out, they might have taken an edible or something before they go out, but then they want to have a drink and they don't want to drink sparkling water or something, so they'll have something like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, beer, NA beer, regular beer is one of the most ultimate social and savory drinks out there, period.
Right. It's embedded in our culture.
It's embedded in our culture. I mean, we live in a drinking culture, and we could have a whole other conversation about, like, people feel very okay opining about why you're drinking or not drinking, as opposed to, like, it's the one thing where people feel like there's no boundary. And, like, why I'm drinking or not drinking is really no one else's business. But everyone feels like, well, why aren't you drinking? And it's like, well, why are you drinking so much? Right? So it's like so I do think there's still this societal pressure that you should be drinking.
Yeah.
But it's changing. I mean, like this.
Well, I want to ask you why it's changing. You mentioned earlier the market is moving away from alcoholic beer. And, I imagine we're saying they're moving away from alcohol in general. Why do you believe that, A, and B, why do you think that's the case? What are the drivers behind that? You mentioned cannabis is one.
Yeah. Well, I was reading an article on the way in from the Atlantic, and they were talking about how it's really about, like, temperance movement back, in the early 1900s is really about just, like, getting people away from alcohol. And, like, the incidence of alcoholism and everything, it's crazy how much people were consuming. Nowadays, it's really about, like, this neo-temperance. And the neo-temperance is really about, how am I self-actualizing? Like, how am I living a better, healthier, happier life? And some people are like, if I cut out alcohol, I know I sleep better. How do I know that? Because I've got a Ring, or I've got a Whoop, or I've got,
right, quantified self.
That's like telling me your sleep was really good last night. That didn't used to exist, right? I didn't know that much about my body. I know if I felt sick, but I didn't really know, was I having a good recovery day, a bad recovery day? Now I know. So I think the information. And then speaking of information, Andrew Huberman put out what I would say a pretty seminal podcast, I think 2 years ago. It's still one of the most downloaded podcasts of all time, about the science of alcohol. What does it actually do to your body? People are more informed. The Surgeon General of the United States coming out and saying,
very recently,
we know that there are 3 types of cancers that are causally linked by alcohol. We should probably put warning labels. I don't know if there are warning labels ever going to be put on alcohol. I don't think it's really that important, because the conversation is already happening. The quiet part was said out loud.
Right. So your health reasons.
Yeah, I mean, predominantly it's health, but not just physical health, mental health. Right? I think COVID taught us a lot of things about mental health, and a lot of people discovered, like, wow, I'm more dependent on alcohol than I realized, and a lot of people backed off. So it's like total health, not just physical, right? Well-being. It's expensive. Like if you look at how much, alcoholic products have increased over time, they're very expensive.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are like, well, if I cut that out, I can buy more coffee, or whatever, save. And then the third is like the self-actualization. I know so much more about my body, and I'm going to use that, to help me like be healthier. Again, maybe it's in very small ways.
Right. So moving forward, I mean, it seems like you have kind of like this paradox of a strategic challenge moving forward. Because on one side, you have all the tailwinds of this, what's called anti-alcohol movement relative to where we've been in the past. On the other hand, since so much of beer, it has been alcoholic beer, basically almost all of it until now, if these headwinds against alcohol consumption continue, then the overall beer category will lower. And with that, the popularity of beer as a form factor could drop as well. So you're going to have to, I would imagine, as part of your go forward strategy, really get consumers to, embrace the love of beer for beer on its own.
You are 1,000% correct. I mean, that's a very astute observation. Like I live it and breathe it every day. You don't, but that's exactly like so we have our annual meetings with our distributors, and that was the sort of the thematic that I shared with our distributors was we want people to love beer.
Right.
Like if they don't love beer as a category, we're never going to be successful.
That's right.
Right. Because you have to have a taste for beer. You have to appreciate the craftsmanship. You have to appreciate the process and, the natural ingredients and all the sort of the romance of the category.
Yeah.
We need to keep that alive. That's why we're not a soapbox company. We really just want to make great options available, but how people play it is always going to be up to them. Yeah. And then I'll just add one more thing because I brought it with me. So we just launched what we're calling, cocktail inspired beer or NA beers. So this is a Paloma.
Yeah, so
and one of the things I love about my job is I get to go and sample our product. And, having that one-on-one conversation with people, to me, is the best marketing there is, right? Getting a product in someone's hand, having them react, that's memorable. And a lot of times we're at different events and people are like, well, I'm not really a beer drinker, right? And that's a sizable audience of people. So we want to deliver things also that are beer-based, but you wouldn't go, oh, that tastes like beer. So we make radlers, we make sours, we make these cocktail-inspired beverages because we do want to address this love of beer, whether you know it or not.
Right. So moving forward, what are some of the tactics and strategies that you're deploying to continue to drive awareness and ultimately sell-through of your product? Like what's working in the marketplace to spread your story?
So what's working is really kind of going back to the origin story, which is getting cans in hands. And it doesn't scale, and it's probably not that efficient, but from an ROI standpoint, we know it works. And so we'll do north of a million samples this year.
Where are you handing out samples?
Everything from a local 5K race all the way up to an Ironman.
And that's how you can do with it. You can't hand out alcoholic beer to anyone. But
correct.
That's an example of a barrier being removed.
Exactly.
You can do sampling. Alcohol companies can.
It's frictionless.
Right.
So we, and then we're over 300 venues, so we're really leaning heavy into live events. Like we talk about moments of participation. So I go and run a 5K, or maybe I do a half marathon or something. But then there are these moments of enjoyment where I just want to kind of sit back and enjoy music, or I want to enjoy sports, or I want to enjoy, and I want a beer. But I don't necessarily want the alcohol, right? For whatever, because it's a Tuesday night and tomorrow's Wednesday, right? And so, but I love the experience of holding a beer and all the rituals. And so we're pushing, I would say significantly into new spaces.
So obviously Gen Z, a huge target for you, and Gen Z being the iPhone generation, getting all of their content from their mobile device, mostly from creators.
Yeah.
What role do creators and influencers play in building your brand, and what type of work have you done in that realm?
Increasingly more and more.
Yeah.
We've always been there. We've always had these incredible brand ambassadors that have really been authentically connected to the brand. So Walker Hayes is one of them. He's a country music artist, and he was just posting about Athletic and how much he loved it. And so the relationship was, we reached out to Walker's team and said, hey, we'd love to do something. And he's like, let's do it. It evolved into, we launched a limited edition beer called Fancy Like, of course. And, but he's one of many, you know, Brian Mazza is another like fitness influencer, and the list goes on. So there's fitness, health, and well-being has always been core, but now we're adding some dimension to that. So again, more in the enjoyment realm, cooking, music. So we're adding, you know, just different creators to our portfolio, but again, who really have an authentic link to the brand. And that makes a big difference for us.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to, it's like people can smell BS from a mile away. They know when it's like very inauthentic. And so I think that's why celebrity has still a place, but it's not quite what it used to be. Right. And now it's more about like, does that creator really drink that? Do they really eat that? Do they really wear that? And, you know, how consistently can you show up in their world? Because then I actually feels like that's a real brand that they really have some connection to.
Yeah. So we're sitting here in 2025, beginning of 2025. If we're going to fast forward 5 years to 2030, which is so scary to think, and only 5 years is 2030. We're just as close to 2030 as we are 2020, which kind of freaks me out. But if you will have executed your vision along with, you know, the founders of the company, where will Athletic Brewing be in 2030?
Athletic Brewing will certainly continue to thrive as a standalone non-alcoholic beer business. So I really hope that we're able to maintain our independence and continue to be successful. I mean, today we've got north of a 19% share of the entire market. We're the number one and driving most of the growth. I hope that continues, number one. Number two, I hope we get into some adjacent spaces so that we can attract people whose first response is, I'm not a beer drinker. We got you. Yeah. We got you because we've got something that's incredibly savory and social that you're going to love. And then number three, just continue to expand our footprint outside of the US. We're in Canada, we're in the UK. This is a global phenomenon. This is not just unique to the United States. So how do we continue to scale the business outside and bring more and more users together? The thing that I love so much about working at Athletic and what attracted me in the first place is it's truly a mission-driven company with two co-founders who are in the business. And it's different, having worked at a lot of big companies.
I was about to ask you what the difference is.
It's just different, right? Because it's personal, right? All their blood, sweat, and tears have gone into this business to get it to this point. There's no reason why we stop here, right? We continue the journey, and the journey has been nothing but circuitous, but it's been great.
And I also imagine it's not for everyone. I mean, there are some people that work at large companies, like you work at Amex, Heineken. You know, when you go to a company that is founder-led, you know, it's different. It's inspiring, but it's also much more high stakes, high pressure, every dollar counts sort of thing. So I would imagine it's also not for everyone. Well, what about you makes it for you?
So I think of a pyramid, triangle, same thing. On the one hand, it checks the box for me personally around health, wellness, and well-being, right? Like that's very core to who I am, and it attracted me to the space in the first place.
Yeah.
And for the record, I still drink alcohol, but I drink so much less of it than I ever have in my life. I drink more beer now, though, a lot more. So that's number one. Number two, entrepreneurship. I sort of did my own venture right before meeting Bill and John, and it's hard as hell.
Yep.
It's. I mean, you know, you can probably attest.
Absolutely.
It's so many days you feel like you're making no progress, but there's something about it that feels like it's mine. And if it doesn't work, it's because I didn't make it work. So I love that accountability component of it. And then the third part is it's beverages. And I think still there's something about with all the division in the world and et cetera, we can still sit down and have a beer together. And there's just something that's just universal about that and wonderful about it. And, that's what I love getting up and doing every day, which is just knowing I'm making a very small dent in the universe by helping people to live, a little bit healthier, a little bit happier.
That's great. So what are some of the areas that you are trying to personally grow in 2025 to evolve as a marketer, given all the changes we're seeing with technology and consumer expectation, et cetera, so you and Athletic Brewing could remain future-proof moving forward?
So a lot of it is getting out into the world. I know that our phones are sort of our masters, and so much of our lives are spent, in front of a device. But the reality is there's nothing like getting people together and connecting.
Yeah.
And so we're making a big push into music this year. So we're partnering with Live Nation for the next 3 years. We're going to be at over 117 different venues, including everything from comedy clubs to music halls to amphitheaters, plus at least probably 4 or 5 different festivals. There's nothing like getting people together in person.
Yeah.
Having that experience with Athletic, that's going to be a big push for us. And maximizing that relationship is sort of paramount for me in 2025, making that work really well. So that's number one. Number two is continuing to push the envelope for ourselves with AI. I kind of feel like it's a little bit trite and it's a little bit AI, but really trying to harness some of it to make our jobs, our lives just better. Not that we're going to use it for our creative. Right. I think there's been a lot of blowback on that.
Yeah.
But just more how do we get smarter, with the help of somebody that's a lot smarter than us.
Yeah.
And then the third piece is, continuing to build my team, and give them the skills that they want and the challenges that they deserve. To be a marketer, a good marketer, you really have to love the product, love the brand, and it comes off really seamlessly. If you do, and if you don't, it's also obvious. So that's sort of don't come in unprepared, because if you're unprepared for this, you're not going to be prepared for the job. And then the other is, I think, just, people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work, even if it's not their work. It's hey, I need help on this, right? We're a lean team. We're a lean company. That's how we operate. I think that's one of the benefits of being an entrepreneurial company is you don't have infinite resources. You don't just say, well, I'll give it to my agency to do. No, you do it. So someone who has that mentality. And then the last thing is, I think, someone who's innately curious. If you're not curious about learning new things, if you're not curious about staying up with trends, then you're probably not going to be very happy here.
Totally makes sense. So, Andrew, as you probably know, we wrap up our podcast always by asking if there's a quote or a mantra that helps sort of summarize our guest professional journey to date. Does anything come to mind for you?
So, there's one that I like a lot, that I had in my room when I was a kid.
Okay.
I don't think I really understood what it meant at the time, but it's a Nike quote, which is, there is no finish line. So I definitely subscribe to that, and I try and live it. I don't know if I always live up to it, but I love the idea that, you can keep reinventing yourself. You can keep challenging yourself. So the finish line is really yours to decide. It's not somebody else. That's one of them. That's more personal. And then the one that professionally I really like is from the founder of Red Bull, who said the only competition is indifference. And I just love that, sharing that with my team. It's yes, we have to pay attention to the competitors that are in our space, but ultimately the consumer who's indifferent to our brand, that's really who we need to convince. We don't really need to compete with these. We need to be the best version of ourselves to attract their attention. And when we do that, we'll be successful.
Yeah, there's a famous photo you've probably seen of Michael Phelps in the Olympics, and he's looking straight towards the finish line, and then the two people who he's in front of are both looking at him.
Right.
And it's just if you have to have your eye on where you're going, and when you look to the left or the right, you're taking your eye off the finish line.
Usain Bolt, same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like he never looks left or right in a race. He just looks at the finish line.
Right.
Right.
And for you, that's the consumer. That's who you're serving.
100%.
Yeah.
And we just have to kind of remind ourselves of that sometimes.
I love that. Well, it's so awesome today to get to learn about you and your strategy and the story of Athletic Brewing. Frankly, I hadn't known nearly as much about it until today, and I'm already a fan. So looking forward to trying some of the product you brought over, and looking forward to continuing to see your success and the success of the brand moving forward.
Thank you, Matt.
Absolutely.
Thanks for
Great having you. Absolutely. On behalf of Suzy and Adweek team, thanks again to Andrew Katz, the CMO of the Athletic Brewing Company, for joining us today. Make sure to check out Athletic Brewing products anywhere they're sold. They're really tasty and very cool product. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the Speed of Culture podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Till next time, see you everyone. Take care. The Speed of Culture is brought to you by Suzy as part of the Adweek Podcast Network and Aguest Creator Network. You can listen and subscribe to all Adweek's podcasts by visiting adweek.com/podcasts. To find out more about Suzy, head to Suzy.com. And make sure to search for The Speed of Culture in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Click follow so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Suzy, thanks for listening.